This is quite a prescient lecture to give. I was in Lincoln, the greatest city in England, last weekend, and went on the established Jewish walking tour there, and was shocked to hear that the Jewish community of Lincoln sells the idea that all Jews in England were in fact moneylenders because they couldn't join guilds. They don't seem to have quite realised that they're trying to sell an anti-Semitic trope as part of their... I mean, in fairness, this was at the start of the tour, and it didn't get better as a result of that. It was bizarre. Like, it was sort of the 1930s, 1920s scholarship meets Narnia. It was properly bizarre. I did try and work out where all of the nonsense came from, but not entirely successfly. But I think money lending and money lenders are also a much maligned topic. When I started my PhD, I told people that I was going to write about Jewish money lending, and I invariably got the question why, which is a question that I spent 3 years asking myself as a result of, particularly towards the end. Why do this? There's an awful lot of scholarship being done on Jewish money lending, particularly in England, but also on the continent. So why did we need another study of these? And I did something quite unconventional, eccentric even, and went to the National Archives in Westminster Abbey and various other places and just ordered up all the contracts of money lending. So rather than just gesticulating in the direction of money lending, I thought I'd actually order up the contracts by which money lending was conducted. As far as I could tell, nobody else had done that previously, which seemed quite odd to me. They're very simple documents, so even my dodgy Latin could manage this. And then I sort of expanded outwards to other kinds of records. And before I knew it, I'd spent 3 years just going through the archives of medieval England. And I think what studying money lending documents taught me was that money lending documents aren't really about money lending at all. They're about communal interactions. They bring people together. They provide us with glimpses of a world which is now lost, but when carefully reconstructed. I love that T-shirt. What was I saying? Oh, when reconstructed, we can learn rather a lot from studying money lending. And in that respect, I think we need to rehabilitate money lending as much as we need to look at it seriously and also to tear down stereotypes. So, were all Jews money lenders? No. Like, this could be the shortest lecture of the day. And I'm sure many of you are hoping that, in fact, this is the last slide. No, enough said. We'll revisit this slide at the end of the lecture and see whether you wish this was the end. No, they weren't. We've always known they weren't. And despite the efforts of people like the Lincoln Jewish community to argue the contrary, no historian has really argued this. However, we do have some statistics. So in the older scholarship, when I started my PhD, the range of Jews engaged in money lending attributed by historians was somewhere between 1% and 99%. Which I stared at for ages at the start of my PhD. Well, what am I meant to do with that? There is a space between 1% and 99%. And in the end, I just acknowledged that these numbers existed. It's sort of like when historians pull random numbers out and hope no one will notice. Well, every single person who's worked on money lending in the last 30 years has highlighted that. So people have noticed, but they didn't try to do any better. I think Julie Mell's book in 2016, The Myth of the Medieval Jewish Moneylender, made some effort, not wholly convincingly, but it's the best we've got, to argue that 50% of Jews didn't lend money at all. 40% did, but only occasionally, and only 10% were professional moneylenders. And in that respect, it chimes with a lot of the evidence that we have, which is to say the same few Jews appear in the records time and again. So although in 1200 we had a Jewish population of about 5,000, possibly dropping to about 2,500 to 3,000 in 1275, actually we only know about a couple of dozen Jews from that population, largely because they're highly visible as moneylenders. And one of the reasons that we have so much evidence, well, there are several reasons we have so much evidence for Jewish money lending. The first is that the English state centralised at a much earlier date than is the case elsewhere. So they were just churning out vast quantities of bureaucratic documentation, which you can still see if you go to the National Archives today. This is the most English of exchequers and traditions, is that you do everything in triplicate. So you have at least one. Is that me? No, that's not me. I was trying to work out whether I was in the way then. Although some of you are wishing I'd just get out of the way. It centralises at an earlier date. So the medieval English Jewish community is better documented than any European Jewish community of such a date. It's not until the late 14th and 15th centuries that comparable evidence survives for Jewish communities on the continent. And I have a habit of going and teasing my continental colleagues by saying how little evidence we have in England and how it's tragic, and they just have to work on a single sentence in a chronicle. It's quite funny, actually. Another reason is that from 1194, Jewish money lending was regulated, or rather Jewish business activities were regulated. And in effect, Richard I, Coeur de Lion, introduces the arca system, the system of chests, whereby all business transactions have to be recorded at an arca or chest in the presence of 2 Christian chirographers, 2 Jewish chirographers, and 2 clerks. And these are not appointed by the Crown. They're always appointed from within the towns. And that creates a really interesting paradigm for understanding money lending, because fundamentally it means that a Jew can't lend money, nor a Christian borrow it, without the acquiescence of the whole community working together. Trust is embedded, and Jews and Christians have to work together. I think another thing to say is that money lending is often approached from the end. That is to say, for when there's disputes about it, mainly at the Exchequer of the Jews, but also elsewhere. And in order to end up in court, something inherently has to have gone wrong anyway. So this isn't a particularly useful entry point for understanding Jewish money lending. But also, if we just look at this acknowledgement of debt, on the one hand, it's a boring, dull acknowledgement of debt. Abraham, son of Benedict, is owed 10 marks by Henry of Durham of London, and it's due at the Feast of Epiphany, so the 6th of January. And there's lots of boring stuff in there. But when we also think, actually, this is probably the pinnacle of Jewish-Christian relations in relation to this transaction, because nobody is ever going to complain when they are handed a bag of 10 marks of silver. Like, they'll be straight to the pub, they'll both get on really well. It's only when the repayment comes that things start to go wrong. Students, or former students, tend to understand this best. You aren't complaining at all when you're spending the student loan in the Students' Union, but as soon as the Students' Loans Company starts taking the money out of your paycheck, then you grumble vociferously. I grumble vociferously and spent the money in the Students' Union, so there you go. But yes, so it's a highly visible form of it's a highly visible activity, but it's also, because of that regulation, it sort of overshadows everything else. So money lending is the predominant theme of a lot of source collections, not all of them, and that has overshadowed everything else. But I think by accessing debt and money lending evidence, we can get closer to what people are actually doing, where they're doing it, why they're doing it. Should also be said that the chests of the chirographers are held in the house of one of the chirographers usually. So in London, we know in the 1270s it's at Queen's Wharf, down near one of the bridges, and I forget which one it is, but just along the river from the Tower. It's not in the Jewry at all, and that's where we know it to have been. Elsewhere at Canterbury, at Lincoln, at Hereford, we know exactly the same pattern is formed. So although people think of the King's Jews, in an urban context, they're not the King's Jews at all. They're very much townspeople, or in the case of London, city people. And in an age when towns and cities are always trying to stop the crown interfering, it's always going to be them versus us. And thus Christians and Jews become the us, and the crown becomes the them. So people are reacting against the crown more often than against the Jews. And just to say, because I'm a particularly boring person, I've put the range of transactions there as 8 to 12,000 which exist. I know there are at least 8,000 because that's how many is on my spreadsheet of transactions. And then there's some which you could include or not include, and there's some that I just haven't got round to yet. But much more pedantic scholarship to follow. If you think, if you are really boring and want to go through all of these records, then what you can actually do is also show the ubiquity of credit, that this is a daily occurrence in the towns and cities of medieval England. There is a peak on a Sunday. It's got nothing to do with the church at all. The church really doesn't care. There is an attempt to stop Christians doing business at the end of the 12th century, beginning of the 13th century, but there's no real efforts to stop this kind of transaction. So Sunday's a particular common day, as is Friday. Jews also lend money on a Saturday, admittedly at a lower level, but they're still doing it on a Saturday. And there have been some particularly unfortunate attempts to explain this away. So Vivian D. Lippman, in his 1967 study of the Norwich Jewry, argued this away by suggesting that the debtor could knock up the creditor after dark, which is terrible phrasing. We shouldn't be knocking up creditors at any time, but certainly not after dark. And actually this doesn't stack up, because as soon as you think it has to go to the arca, you need all these people present, you need a clerk to do it. It's not simply happening in the creditor's house. So there's clearly a Sabbath evasion going on. I think the best evidence that we do have for this is Hereford. Hereford love just to skip around any kind of thing. So I think half of that 41 are from Hereford, but Lincoln's the second best. Lincoln also is a rebellious city. Canterbury, ironically, isn't. It's a city that I think of in rebellion, but don't do it at all. Quite sad. But yes, this is the ubiquity of credit. And you think also we see this pattern replicated month by month. Broadly speaking, it's a daily occurrence. It happens every week, every month of the year. There's no substantive differences. I think it's also useful for getting rid of some of these tropes which people go on about. So it's common to say that Jews were cowering within their homes during Palm Sunday week. What's that, Holy Week? Yeah, Holy Week. I'm a historian of the Jews, so that's not out my thing. And also in Easter week. Certainly on the continent, we do have evidence of this cowering in their homes and Jews being subject to violent attacks during these times. Actually, that could never work in England. Partly because people need to borrow money, and the act of borrowing money is a highly visible affair. So when I talked about the ARCA system before, one of the things that you have to do is, before the contract can be admitted to the chest, you have to read it aloud to the audience and to the people around. And thus it's actively drawing attention to a Jew, and thus this is not something that can be done subtly as a private agreement. It's very visible. And yes, you simply can't afford to attack Jews, because all of this borrowing is fundamentally paying your rent. And if you don't borrow the money, you can't pay the rent, you get evicted, it all ends tragically. So on the whole, we don't have a great deal of evidence for attacks on the Jewry during Holy Week or Easter week. There are exceptions to this, obviously. Clifford's Tower massacre happens in March 1190. Also, you've got the attack on the Jewry of London in April 1264, but that's a coincidence of chronology as opposed to a deliberate act. So Simon de Montfort is in quite a tricky position in March and April and May 1264. He's lost at the Battle of Northampton. He's sort of being chased around Kent for a bit. He comes back to London. Gilbert de Clare's just running rampage. And then we actually see him attack the Jews when he's marching to St Albans to confront Henry III and the Lord Edward. But this is, he then has to double back at that point to protect his flank his rear, as opposed to it being an overt act. But yes, so you cannot cower in your homes during Holy Week and Easter week because you're too busy lending money, or at least the top 10% are, and they're the most visible, so they're most likely to be attacked. I think this is one of my favourite acknowledgements of debt. In fact, I don't think at all. This is my favourite acknowledgement of debt. It's a delightful survival in the National Archives, dated the 5th of August, 1265. And it names one of my favourite medieval Jews, Cress, son of Genta. And I feel Cress is... You cannot understand the London Jewry if you don't understand Cress, son of Genta, fundamentally. Cress is never one of the greatest Jews in medieval England, but he's associated with every single prominent London Jew across the 1250s, 1260s, 1270s and the 1280s. And he seems to be the man that makes everything work. So he's particularly active as a moneylender. But we also see him in the administration of justice. So whenever there's a jury called for or an inquisition called for, Cress is often the most prominent middling Jew there. And Howard will show you a inquisition post-mortem at lunch, which he carefully selected and curated. I may have provided a little hint. And the first Jewish witness in that witness list is Cress, son of Genta. So he's active in the administration of justice, the engagement with the local community, and a focal point between Jewish community and town and crown. And while he never really, or we can't really suggest that he does have very strong links with Henry III and later Edward I, we can say that he has very strong links with Adam de Stratton, the Chamberlain of the Exchequer, and thus he's got access via another means. It's sort of backdoor dealing. Adam de Stratton is one of the most notorious Christian moneylenders of the... let's just go for hyperbole, of the entire English Middle Ages. When they execute him in 1290, Adam de Stratton, they basically have to chuck the kitchen sink at him. So it's everything from usury to witchcraft and everything in between. They try in 1288 or 1289 to get him, and they sort of go for the Al Capone-style tax evasion. And when that doesn't work, they jump straight to witchcraft. As one would. I think also this debt is really interesting because it's dated the 5th of August 1265, which for those of you who are particularly pedantic will know that's the day after the Battle of Evesham. Now, when Simon de Montfort and a lot of people, or a lot of rebels are killed. And people always say that actually it's a low point under Simon de Montfort for the Jews. And while there are attacks, certainly, these are either at the very beginning or the very end of his period. But also, in fact, the Arca system runs exactly the same during the Montfortian period as any other period. And Simon, where the system is attacked, he works hard to reinstate it. But also, as Sharon Lieberman long ago showed in a thesis of, I think, 1978, actually fewer debts get cancelled by Simon de Montfort than do by Henry III. So there's no substantive change in royal attitudes or governmental attitudes towards Jewish moneylending in the period of Montfortian rule as distinct from Henry III. Basically, everyone's a bit of a swine when it comes to cancelling debts. Simon de Montfort tends to cancel usury, Henry III tends to cancel debts. They're both a bit of a problem from a Jewish moneylending perspective. But this just shows us that even in those turbulent times, people are still coming together and still working together. And I think this is also interesting because people latch onto a case in the plea rolls of the Exchequer of the Jews, which show that some Jews fled England for the continent, and Normandy specifically, not Rouen, as one might expect, but Chateauneuf, so 25 miles north east of Rouen. And they're there for about, well, one group's there for about 12 months, and one group's about there for 18 months. But in fact, lots of Jews stay in London, and the war and then the change of rule has very little effect on them after the initial massacre of April 1264, when lots of people are targeted. Italians are particularly targeted. No one likes the Italians in medieval England. In fact, if you read Matthew Paris, the 13th century chronicler, not the ITV journalist, then you will you'll get this impression, because Matthew is very generic and bog standard about the Jews. Where he gets really angry and really florid is with the Italians, and the level of hate that he's able to direct at the Italians is spectacular. It can be just talking about the weather and then, right, I need a rant about the Italians. One suspects he'd vote reform in the modern era. But I think this family tree is also illustrative of why we should study the records of Jewish moneylending. Without the records of Jewish moneylending, we would not have a single clue about any of this. All of these appear as moneylenders throughout the records, many of them fleetingly, apart from Cress, but we were able to build up this really nice image of an Anglo-Jewish family, which was only previously possible for the upper level of the Jewish community. And I think it's also really nice just to see how many women feature in these family trees as well. So at the upper level, we've always known that women are prominent, and we'll hear it from Emma about women later. But Muriel holds a house on Milk Street in 1290. It's a house specifically that her dad had foreclosed on from a debt and gives to her, basically. Genta, one of his daughters, appears quite often in the West Country. So there's that marriage connection, particularly over to Exeter and Herefordshire. You've got, who else have you got? You've got Onterra, who, as a result of a cataloguing error, ended up as a man for about a century. But in fact, is quite clearly a woman, and thus is one of the larger moneylenders of the family as well. So we get this wonderful insight into a Jewish family and them all working together. So we see them individually, but also coming together. And there are some nice cases where Cress and his wife Abigail appear together. And in fact, it's one of those stories of medieval Jewish or Jewish families through the ages, whereby the wife seems to dominate whatever the husband is going to do. She seems to be an incredibly strong Jewish woman, and really dominates the family. And I think although this is an incredibly visible family, it is something which could be reproduced for a lot of Jewish families, albeit not necessarily on the same scale. And just to signpost that some of that work is being done by Natasha Genman in the audience, who is creating a massive database of all of these families, which will eventually be able to show how they connect to each other. This took about 2 years to do. Hers, you'll just press a button and it'll really irritate me. I had to suffer for mine. She just puts it into a database. It turned into one of those memes whereby you have the crazy professor with lots of string on a corkboard at one point. I wasn't quite sure who was who. And Benedict Bateman is a particularly problematic person because he appears in the records as either Benedict or Bateman. It took quite a long time to work out that he was in fact the same person. So if Cress is my favourite London Jew, Benedict Bateman, his son, is arguably my least favourite. Just because of the endless and countless hours it took. Isn't it? I think he probably is the same person. And we do get a number of cases where he appears as both Benedict and Bateman, but also Benedict Bateman, son of Cress, son of Genta. So it's a really nice thing, and it also allows us to link into the topography of the London Jewry. So Genta, the mother of Cress, we know held a house on Honey Lane. Cress, we're not quite sure where he lived. Muriel, we know she lived on Milk Street, and it's all just a really nice thing. So again, through the careful layering of different kinds of money lending sources, we can get a pretty good understanding of families and familial relations. Obviously, we can't get that daily life aspect of them arguing at supper, but we can get pretty close. And indeed, as we'll hear throughout the papers today, I think we probably have more evidence from medieval England of Jews arguing with other Jews than we do have of Christians and Jews arguing, which, if you've ever been to Israel, makes so much sense. So if they weren't moneylenders, what were they doing? Well, it has been suggested quite laughably that they might have been ladder makers. This comes from and to be honest, I just want I like this because it's not clear whether it's plagiarism or incompetence. But fundamentally, in 1905, an edition of the Norwich Day Book, a list of debts and transactions at the Norwich Arca, was produced, and someone transcribed La Française as Le Scholarius, i.e. the ladder maker. I've sat with the individual manuscript in the Westminster Abbey archive, taken my glasses off, squinted. I cannot get La Française to read Le Scholarius at all. And it was actually corrected in the 1967 edition of this roll. But despite this, particularly Jewish communities don't necessarily read the latest scholarship. 1967, not necessarily the latest scholarship, but they just say random rubbish. And it just makes things quite difficult for those of us who are saying things. So let's just break this down. There was one Jew who was a ladder maker. No, there wasn't. Only if you can take your glasses off, squint, and get it to read Scholarius, in which case I'll give you the credible thing. There was one Jew in Essex who had a very successful business selling firewood. Well, he sold one tree, which is not quite the same thing. Jewish men-at-arms, we know from Rory's work that there was one person who holds a crossbow at the top of the tower. Whether there were more than one of those is a debatable thing, and various other nonsense. This is what you get when you ask amateurs. The New York Times should know better. In reality, we do have, or we can at least get glimpses of what Jews are doing, even if we don't know per se. So the most obvious thing is he didn't come to England as moneylenders at all, not least because there are moneylenders already here, so they don't need to come for that. In the 11th and early 12th century in particular, they seem to be traders, dealers in fine cloth and fur, changers of money, dealers in silver, that sort of thing. The dealing in these being merchants effectively, and connecting England to part of a European network of trade which, as Robert Stacey has shown for a century earlier, the silver roots have already been connected to England. It's just we've not quite got that mercantile connections in the way that would be necessary for the development of a commercialising economy. And in fact, 1066 is about when you'd expect Jews to arrive anyway. Jews have been gradually expanding across Europe throughout much of the latter part of the first millennium. So by around 1000, there's a Jewish community, or several Jewish communities in Normandy, and thus it takes a bit of time to embed in there and then to expand further. So there really couldn't have been a Jewish community in England much before it arrived anyway. And then it sort of connects England to part of that trade. It's also worth saying actually that they're always thought of English Jews when they arrive here, as opposed to Jews, even by the Jewish communities of the continent. So they're always described as othered, effectively, not least by Jews of the continent. We have good evidence of that there are ritual slaughterers for animals. We have this at Canterbury and at Gloucester. At London, we know that there was an actual specific building where you went to kill animals in the appropriate fashion. But we also know from the receipt rolls that Jews were also active at the fish market buying their own stuff, which had been collected, which had been caught and presumably killed. I was having this conversation with Rory a few weeks ago, and Howard indeed, and we were trying to work out whether we had any evidence of a Jewish kitchen, for which, as far as we can tell, or as far as I could tell, obviously they're better historians than I am, there are no, there's no evidence of Jewish kitchens in medieval England, which is not to say that they didn't have them. It's just to say that kitchens are an incredibly expensive commodity in the medieval world, and street food for the Christian population can be more common than having a kitchen. We also have evidence of rabbis and scholars, which I'll come on to in a minute, but Lincoln, it was long argued, was this great centre of Jewish learning, not least from people like Master Benedict, Master Yosk, who really do quite a lot of scholarship there. Although this day is devoted to London, I'll be disappointed if everyone doesn't come away thinking Lincoln is the best of the Jewish communities. And there will be a test as you leave. We just won't let you leave until you give the correct answer of Lincoln. We've got evidence of Jews as physicians. In London particularly, one of the first references to Jews appears to be in the 1131 pipe roll, whereby a Jewish doctor, or rather a Jewish patient, seems to have died under the care of a Jewish doctor, and thus the entire community is fined for this. But it gives us that insight into the Jewish community. There are keepers of the cemetery, and it's particularly apt as part of this project to mention the cemetery, because in fact it started just to understand what the cemetery was, where it was, what its function was. And in 1256, 1257, we have a wonderful grant to Elias, Master Elias, son of Master Moses, who is described as the keeper of the cemetery. And really, quite frankly, despite the best efforts of the Lincoln Jewish community, fundamentally what you need people to be doing within the community is to be doing the stuff that has to sustain a community everywhere anyway. So just because it doesn't appear in the records doesn't mean that you don't need people who are doing the ritual slaughtering, or the preparing the food, or being servants, or wet nurses, or whatever. Like, all of this stuff is going on. It's just money lending is so dominant that we simply can't access it. But it would be quite wrong to suggest that this wasn't happening. And when we expand our knowledge to the continent as well, we have lots of really good evidence of Jews as artisans, as members of working on crafts. Oh, this was the thing I was saying to someone before. Guilds. People get very obsessed about guilds in spreading knowledge about the Jews of medieval England. In fact, when they're talking about guilds, they're talking about sort of 14th century Germany. like there they have an economic monopoly. In England, they tend to be more like fraternities who are more concerned with praying, which Jews inherently don't have a vested interest in praying with Christians or to a Christian God. So they're not involved in that. It doesn't preclude them from any economic activities. A survey of over 100 guild statutes, so doesn't actually anywhere preclude Jews from entry. And we do have one example of a Jew being admitted to a guild, Benedict the Guildsman, son of the great Licorice of Winchester, but actually that's followed almost immediately by one of the only examples of an anti-Jewish massacre, which is led by the town. They get really pernickety about the fraternity being corrupted. And I just really want to end, you'll be glad to hear, with Master Elias, son of Master Moses. Cecil Roth, in his great study of Master Elias, Elias de Menahem, labels him as the most illustrious English Jew, the most illustrious Jew of the English Middle Ages. And despite my regular ranting against Cecil Roth, I think that's probably true. He is sort of one of those people who can do everything. So he's a rabbi, but he basically is the leading rabbi in England, and a responser of 1265. While he's absent in Normandy, another English rabbi issues a legal decree. He comes back and gets very shouty with the other Jew and says, "I'm the leading rabbi in England. If anyone's going to issue this, I'm going to do it." So he reissues the responser and basically says exactly the same thing as the previous one has done. But this is very Jewish rabbi type thing. Anything that someone else can say, they can say it better. No offence to the rabbi in the room. He's also a physician, and we know this from a wonderful case in 1282, when the Count of Hainault in France falls ill, and Elias writes for letters of safe conduct to go and tend to his patient, because the Count of Hainault has been through all the Christians and they can't do much for him, so in the end they just go for the greatest Jewish physician. It's unclear whether he ever actually goes or not. Like, there's a lot of bureaucracy about getting out of England to the continent, and he may just recover, but I think we can still say that Master Elias saved the Count of Hainault because he asked him to go. So it's happy thoughts, if not medical treatment. He's also one of the great scholar, and I think this is an important point which has long been missed in the Anglo-Jewish scholarship, that there are a lot of responsa which survive. On the whole, Jews themselves wrote England out of Jewish history after 1290, but these responsa do survive in continental collections, and in sort of the last 20 years Pinchas Roth has done an incredible amount of work to reconstruct these responsa, and is in the process of publishing them in a multilingual edition. And it's really, like, I love Pinchas to death, but it's really irritating, because if we took all of my Latin sources, of which there are thousands, he just basically has to publish a new responsa, and you've got much more evidence of social interactions than I could hope to drag out of the entire thing. So yeah, lovely man, brilliant scholarship. I just wish Latin sources were a bit spicier. Just anything, just to spice up money lending transactions, basically. I've already mentioned the keeper of the cemetery. I don't think he was walking around with a jingly set of keys, but I do think he was sort of maintaining the rituals and the processes necessary to bury someone in London. I think London is probably also the only place you can actively observe Jewish life in the medieval world, in medieval England in its entirety, because it's the only place that's got everything that's needed to do that, including people and including communal infrastructure. He's a moneylender as well. Quite frankly, because of the title of this talk, I won't go on about that, and also I could talk about money lending ad nauseum. He's a businessman. I'm going to end with this because it just speaks to my personal interests as opposed to my academic interests, which is to say in 1280 he, along with another London Jew, Aaron son of Vives, had 8 tons of wine imported to London, which were produced in Bordeaux according to the Jewish custom. And when I worked this out over the pandemic, it worked out to about 12,000 bottles, which I felt was enough to get you through one pandemic. And so I presume he was sharing it about, but I'd like to think he drank it all himself. And we do have evidence from England of Jews complaining, oh, I could only have a brief sip of the wine, and then had to pass on the glass. I think, as I've long argued, 12,000 bottles of wine don't go nearly as far as you'd want it to. Thank you.
That was a fabulous start to the day, and I hope you've got a bunch of questions.
I'm happy for you not to have a bunch of questions, to be honest.
We have 2 of our stewards here with microphones, so please raise your hand to let us know that you've got a question. Oh boy, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
We've only got 15 minutes for questions because we've got to stay to time. I've got one I can start you off with that's come on from the live stream from Laura Vaughan at University College London.
Oh, excellent. Great urban historian.
She says you've provided rich evidence on the variety of occupations with quite strong economic and social integration. Can you comment on whether this was reflected in their pattern of settlement? Were they living in a spatial cluster, as hinted by Old Jewry, or were they dispersed?
That is a very precise question. Yes, I can comment on that. Broadly speaking, there is dispersal. So the main jury is over down from here. Yeah, down from here. And the richer Jews have properties also on Queen's Wharf. In general, what we see when mapping out Jewish settlement practices is it's not according to religious grounds at all. It's according to economic practices. So broadly speaking, people of the same economic income will live together, Christians and Jews, and this allows us to map out the settlements. So poorer areas have Jews, poor Jews, richer areas have richer Jews. It used to be thought that they had to live in the city walls or in the proximity to the castle for protection. Actually, this isn't at all the case, and Chris Johnson's work on Lincoln in particular has shown actually that there's settlements outside of the city walls, so they don't seem to be worried at all about any of this. And yes, they settle according to where the markets are, where where basically you want your kids to go to the better schools, so you settle in the areas with the better schools, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Question in the room. Someone got the microphone?
There's someone at... Oh.
Sort of a second. What was the interest rate, and did it fluctuate according to demand?
2 pennies in the pound per week.
Okay, that's reasonable.
It depends on your perspective. If you've got to pay it...
My question to you is, in your research, can you tell me when the money was loaned, and you've said very clearly that there were quite a number of people around, were there actually people that signed as witnesses to the transaction or not?
The debtor seals the transaction, but in a Latin acknowledgement of debt, nobody else signs it. If it's a Hebrew quitclaim, that will be signed.
How many people were involved?
It varies.
Oh, you can't say?
Well, I mean, it ranges from 1 to about a dozen.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, which is, hopefully, that's almost as helpful as 1 to 99%.
Right. Up in the corner by the wall, please. Yes, you, sir?
So you're talking about the percentages of, like, how many people lended money?
Yeah.
That's probably best a bit far away. So did this vary city to city, or is it, like, roughly the same?
It's probably roughly the same, to be honest, because it used to be thought that people just live where they're born and don't move. But in fact, there's a lot of movement between towns and cities. So you've got the same people lending, they just go from city to city. So in that respect, a lot of people dominate different markets. And Jews of Lincoln and London are those which dominate the entire country in that respect.
Who's next got their hand up? Oh, somebody there on the left. You pass them the microphone, then we'll come down to you, sir.
Did you give feedback to the organisers of the Lincoln walking tour?
They didn't appreciate it.
I was going to say, and if so, what was their reaction?
Okay.
Gentleman here.
Yes, thank you. Great talk. Thanks very much. I'd like to ask you about the origin of the English term moneylender. Who came up with it? Is it a translation of an earlier Norman French or Latin term? Is it? I think it's a disparaging term. I don't know why we use it. Why don't we just call them bankers or private bankers?
Because it's not banking. Banking is a very distinct thing. I don't know where the word originates, but fundamentally banking is a very specific thing, and the lending of money is a very specific act, and that's what I'm referring to.
But you have to have money in order to lend it. So
Why?
they collected coins as well as lending them. Money lending is only half of what you do. You have to collect it. You have to have it.
Yes, and they do have it to lend it.
Yeah.
So I'm not referring to their other business activities as money lending, just a very specific act of lending money as a money lending.
I'll interject to say it's a very interesting point.
Oh, I like that pun.
It's a very interesting point because Dean is, of course, absolutely correct. But the term has become emotive. People talk about Jewish medieval moneylenders, whereas when people talk about Dick Whittington, who is also another medieval character who made his money through finance. So we have this stereotype that haunts us, and one of the things that the Jewish Square Mile Foundation is very intent on is that in the City of London, whose international fame and wealth has been built on finance, there's a need for moral clarity around money. And that's a purpose. As you've heard today, Jews weren't just money lenders, and that character as money lenders, as Jewish money lenders, is something that has been imposed on them. Because I think, Dean, you've said very often that the Christian money lenders were more usurious than the Jewish money lenders.
Yeah, they were. And I've written on Jewish money lenders, I've written on Italian money lenders, I've written on Christian money lenders. So I'm not drawing a distinction or something. And it's quite clearly not banking, because we know what that is, and it's clearly not banking.
Did you find evidence of Jewish money lenders lending to Jewish people? And if so, was interest being charged?
Yes and yes.
Oh, right.
That's right, up at the... yes.
So you mentioned that one of the daughters of Cressy, son of Genta, was also a moneylender.
Yes.
And I was just curious about what the gender breakdown was for Jewish moneylenders.
Oh, that's quite difficult to say. I've just argued that it's about 4% appear in the money lending evidence. Now, part of this is because it's more challenging to lend money lend money, but to end a money lending agreement as a woman. So you just have to withdraw the charter more often. I think probably there are more women than 4% lending money. Emma Cavell has argued, is it 18 or 19% for the Exchequer of the Jews?
About a ratio about 5 to 1.
5 to 1. So that's
the same with the Christians.
Yeah, so I think probably the ratio that we get in the Exchequer of the Jews is about right.
Next question, gentleman there.
You mentioned Shabbat non-observance.
Yes.
What methods were there for enforcing religious law? And were there concerns from religious authorities, either Jewish religious authorities talking to Jews or Christian religious authorities talking to Christians, about the charging of interest or usurious activity?
The Christians tend to be more concerned about Christian usurers, not least because it's much more exorbitant. It's quite difficult to access Jewish interpretations of the enforcement of law, but certainly we do have evidence that the Beth Din are active imposing fines Henry III gets quite stroppy about this at one point, because although the fines are being levied, he thinks it should go to the Exchequer as opposed to the Beth Din, in that most typical of Henry III things. He's happy for them to administer the justice, he just wants the money as a result of it. But it's quite irritating in England, because in fact in Germany we do have wonderful evidence of that enforcement and how it works as a communal regulation thing. Again, so some people think that specific churches were constructed in specific places to observe whether Jews are doing what they're supposed to on the Sabbath or whatever, so that they can say it's total nonsense, but people say it. Yeah.
Just wait for the microphone, please. I'm just going to pose got a couple of questions while you take the microphone that we've had from the live stream. So Stephen Sanderson is asking, what were the consequences if borrowers didn't pay, and how easy was it for Jewish lenders to enforce this? And Eva Brooke has asked if there was a distinction between, and I think you touched on this already, the interest costs for Jewish and non-Jewish financiers.
Yes. The first one is that it starts to accumulate interest. So you have a grace period during which no interest is required to be paid, and then it starts to accumulate interest, at which point you can then start to put social pressure on people and lots of things to try and get this money in. We have remarkably little evidence of repayment. These records simply don't survive on the whole, except for things like Irwin of Lincoln or the Norwich Day book. In fact, fundamentally, we struggle quite a lot to access these things. But it does seem to be that people are repaying their debts, because, in fact, the same debtors borrow year on year from the same creditors, and you wouldn't lend to them again if you didn't get your money back. And what was the second question?
Second, is there a distinction in the interest cost?
Oh, yes, it's much higher to borrow from a Christian. Don't do it. It's sort of like when you used to get on television the adverts for Wonga, and it was like 1,000%. Just borrow from a regulated source. It's always the best way to do that, and Jews are regulated, so it's easier in every respect.
Lady here.
Did they have to pay tax to the king on their interest that the money lenders earn?
They do have to pay tax, but not on their interest, so it's not an income tax type thing. They're heavily taxed, particularly from the 1240s to the 1260s, and the Crown puts an awful lot of pressure on the Jewish community and decimates quite a lot of its wealth as a result of that. So yes, tax, no, not taxed on income.
And on your charts, you had grey and then brown. Could you explain that to me?
I'm partially colourblind, so it may just be that it's the two colours that I could have distinguished.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Rabbi Morris there?
Hi, I have two questions. So my favorite medieval Jew is Isaac of York.
Which one?
Is he based on Aaron of Lincoln?
Walter
Scott's.
Yeah, sorry, that one.
That's right. So that's the first question.
Yeah.
The second question is, there's a lot kind of that people speak of kind of the forced cancelling of these debts, and that was kind of a way that Jews were persecuted, probably forced them to charge potentially higher interest rates because of the risk inherently involved in Jews in money lending. Are there institutions that were responsible for the canceling of debts? And obviously there's been a lot of work recently about reparations in terms of institutions that were involved in the slave trade. You know, is there any work that's been looked at, Westminster Abbey, other institutions, and kind of reparations for the canceling of Jewish debts and kind of the you know, obviously the harm caused by those institutions over history?
You'll be shocked to discover that I'm not in charge of the diplomatic element of medieval Anglo-Jewry. So I wouldn't have thought so, not in the least, because you can't trace any Jew after they leave England. So fundamentally, you couldn't really create that connection in the way you could elsewhere. Isaac of York is typically thought to be based on Aaron of York, not Aaron of Lincoln. So Aaron of York is a great 13th century financier who's one of the most tragic of England's Jews. He's the richest Jew in England in 1240. By 1255, he has to be excused from his tallage payments on account of his great poverty. The crown has taken so much from him, he's simply got no more to give, and he dies in 1268 without, more or less without note. So yes, in terms of charging more interest, no, you can't do that. It's regulated from 1233, and every transaction gives exactly the same interest rate. And actually, it would be a really easy thing to do for a Christian to argue that excessive usury was being imposed upon this transaction at the Exchequer of the Jews to get it cancelled, and this only happens a handful of times at most. So it's clearly not happening because you just do it to get out of the debt. Like, it's a like, if you thought there was a reasonable chance of getting out of it, you'd do it. And the fact that people don't do it, it's illustrative that they don't.
Well, thank you, Dean. We're going to take our first break, Dean. With a bit of luck, Dean will be around the place, and I'm sure that, and I'm sure answering questions. Thank you all for your attention. It's a 15-minute break, so please come back promptly. What you will do is you will now meet, there will be around, the great Licoricia of Winchester and her maid Alice, who, if you know their story, sadly ended with a murder which was never solved. And you'll also meet a Jewish sergeant at the Tower who was a foot in both worlds, the Jewish and the non-Jewish. And you can examine some facsimiles of documents, none of which were selected by me, all of which selected by Dean, and grateful to Rory McLellan because we've obtained some copies of pages from the most incredible book, the trilingual Psalter and Dictionary, which was a collaboration between Jewish scholars and Christian monks in the 1260s. So imagine this, as the world for Jews became darker and darker, nonetheless, over a period of perhaps 3 years, scholars from both faiths worked together to create the most incredible book. So do have a look at these and ask questions, and we'll see you back in 15 minutes. Thank you, Dean.